What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at character creation in its current form in Baldur's Gate 3's early access that launched recently. So, a couple of caveats. This is not one of my in-depth character creation videos. If you're new here, which you more than likely are because 95% of the people who watch my channel aren't subscribed. So, with that in mind, I'm assuming you're new. One of the things that I do commonly is put out character creation videos about similar games, basically just RPGs in general. And I really go in depth on what's going on as far as options go. Given that this is early access, basically all I want to do is kind of show you guys what is available currently. Larian has already stated, the developer that is, has already stated that they will be adding more stuff to the game as far as races and stuff go, to the character creation, I should say more specifically. Keep in mind, what you're seeing here is not everything that there will be, but basically I just want to show people what's available and how it kind of converted Dungeons & Dragons tabletop character creation to the actual game of Baldur's Gate 3. So, the first scene we come up to is the origin screen. We can pick male or female if we are having a custom character, or we can pick one of the origin characters. The origin characters are not actually available at the moment, so we're not really covering them in any particular depth here, obviously. Then we can name our character, and then we can pick a background. Backgrounds, in addition to giving us a history for our character, also decide what you're proficient in addition to a couple other things, but these are the main way you would pick them. Now there's a variety of backgrounds, all with varying proficiencies. Now when you pick a proficiency through this method, what you're actually doing is giving yourself a proficiency bonus to rolls for that particular subject. If you're talking to someone about, in this particular instance, animal handling, or you're trying to, handle an animal, and you need to pass a proficiency check, you're going to roll for animal handling, and it's going to roll a die 20, and it's going to show you a target number on top of that. I don't know if this is intentional or not because the game's still pretty new, but in my experience, it says that it adds your bonus to any roll that you make, but the way it actually shows up on screen is that it lowers the target for the check. As far as I've noticed, anytime that you need to roll a check like this, it shows you the target number, and I've tested it a few different times, and using a character that is proficient just lowers the target number versus literally adding the numbers to whatever you roll. And I think that's to make it more visually distinct, but the problem here is that in character creation, it literally says that it's adding the bonus to what you rolled, which isn't, in my experience, what's actually happening. Pick your origin, name your character, pick your background, which picks proficiencies, and then we come to race. Now, right now, we've got Elf, which has the sub-races of High Elf and Wood Elf. High Elves get cantrips, or they get to pick one cantrip anyway, of the list of cantrips, as well as having all of these particular race features. As you can see, elves get these, and then the sub-race gives you these traits, which I'm a big fan of. They actually did separate it and show specifically what the sub-race is actually giving you versus what the regular race is giving you. So for high elves right now, you can pick high elf, well, for elves rather, you can pick high elf or wood elf. Tieflings, for tieflings, your sub-race is your demonic bloodline. If you don't know, tieflings are actually half demons, and you can pick what demon that you are related to through some lineage. That being Asmodeus, Mephistopheles, or Zariel, my personal favorite, by the way. But tieflings get things like hellish resistance and dark vision, and they get a lot of good bonuses depending on your sub-race and stuff. Then we have drow. Drow are like dark elves, more or less, is the best way to put it. They are elves that have lived underground for most of their life and have thus become these dark elf looking fellows. For sub-races, you got Lolthsworn and Seldarine. Then that brings us to human. There is no sub-race for human. Humans are human. They get +1 to everything, plus the base racial speed. Humans are the generic race, as you might imagine, in most games, so pick them if you don't know what else to pick, really. Then we have the Githyanki. Githyankis are warriors from the astral plane, which are really awesome, actually. I'm a big fan of them aesthetically. I don't personally enjoy playing them, but I think as a culture and a race, they are really cool. They get a bunch of proficiencies in swords and armor, as well as strength and base racial speed and all that. Then we have our dwarf with the sub-race of gold or shield, which changes some proficiencies and bonuses. Then we have our half-elf. We can pick a high half-elf or a wood half-elf. or a drow half-elf. Now the cool thing about half-elves is that you get to pick specifically where you want one of your ability improvements to go. So because of that, I imagine that a lot of people will probably pick half-elf if you want a little more customization with exactly where your stats are going, but we'll get into that in a second. It's not wholly necessary, but if you want like a specific stat from your bonuses, then half-elves are kind of the way to go. And that brings us to halfling, and then we have lightfoot halfling or strongheart halfling, which again changes our bonuses. Once we've decided what our race is, we go to appearance after that. Appearance is pretty much your standard stuff. You pick a voice, you pick one of like 12 or 5 or 6 or whatever, how many options they happen to have for that particular one. You pick a generic face, you can pick a skin color. I will note that if you unclick all skin colors, then you can pick stuff that's not even for your race, really. Typically speaking, when you pick a race, it will give you skin tones that are considered like natural for that race, but for the sake of letting you do what you want, if you click all skin colors, you can actually give them a skin tone that isn't necessarily what that race would typically have for whatever reason you want to do it. Same thing with eye colors. Then you can pick hair, beard. There's usually about 10 to 12 options. Hair tends to get the most options, as you can see. And then tattoos, same thing. There's only a few tattoo options. They vary a little bit, but most of them are like face tattoos. They're not like tied to a race or anything as far as I can tell. They all look pretty much the same from one race to another. And then if you want, you can pick a makeup style. So from there, we pick our class. We don't have all of the classes available right now either, but we do have Cleric, Fighter, Ranger, Rogue, Warlock, and Wizard. Personally, I'm fairly familiar with Warlock, Wizard, and Fighter. So a lot of these I don't know a ton about, besides like generic stuff. But I will say, it does a decent job of guiding you through what you're doing with your class. So if you wanted to pick a Cleric, you can pick your subclass, whatever sounds cool for you, I suppose. And then that will give you access to different options like spells and things like that. So personally, Warlock is a favorite of mine. Your subclass is going to be who you're bound to. Now, the player's handbook actually has 3 of these options. Right now there's only 2 of them available, which is the Fiend and the Great Old One. There's also like a Fey patron of some sort. I forget exactly what the name of it is offhand, but I know there's at least one more in the 5th edition player's handbook. Warlocks are really cool. They get a couple cantrips, and their spells are always cast at the highest level available, so they don't have to like pick what spell slot they want to cast a spell with, like say a wizard would have to. Their spells are always cast at the highest possible level, and they just get a lot of fun stuff going on. Big fan of Warlocks, a little bit about me there. And that brings us to skills. So this is where we can pick some of our proficiencies depending on some of the choices we made earlier. Most people can pick at a minimum 2, and then sometimes your race will let you pick more than 1, or it'll have given you some. So these that are already clicked off, that's because I have them through another form, and then you can actually pick up to, choosing whichever ones you happen to want as part of your background, or say your race, or just something you want your character to be good at for your own role playing. And that brings us to our ability scores, last but not least. So Baldur's Gate 3 is using what is called a point buy system. There are a couple different options for rolling attributes and ability scores, if you will, in Dungeons and Dragons. So because this is a video game, actually rolling them isn't a ton of fun. So they're using the point buy system, which is that you get 27 points to assign on top of whatever the base for your race and class is. So that is the base amount, which is usually around 8 or 9, depending on what you got going on. And then you can use points to put them where you want. Pretty much every class comes with a recommended spread, so that's something to keep in mind if you don't really want to mess with the specifics. But in addition to that, if you look on the left side over here, it'll always tell you probably what the most important attribute is for your character. Now, everybody kind of needs some constitution because that's your life. But for a warlock, their spellcasting ability, as well as paladins, sorcerers, and bards, they use charisma as their spellcasting ability, which means it's their plus chance to hit, shall you say. You get extra points. You get your proficiency bonus for it, or whatever, your ability score bonus, I believe it's actually called, on top of your attack roll. So basically it just makes your spells more likely to hit with that particular stat. So always pay attention to that. Warlocks use charisma Wizards use intelligence, druids, rangers, and clerics use wisdom. So something to keep in mind. Everybody needs constitution. Dex is like, physical stuff, and then strength is like, how strong you are. It also affects how far you can jump and the weight you can carry. So there is all that. Now again, this isn't meant to be like some big in-depth look at what character creation is in Baldur's Gate 3. I just wanted to kind of show everybody the options, what it looks like, how that translates from D&D to this game. Now I want to take the last little bit of this video to talk about some of the things I hope they brush up, shall we say, between now and the actual release. First things first, the one I want to mention the most is simply that they need to clarify the way proficiency bonuses work, because again, it doesn't come off great that it says it adds it to your roll or whatever, that's what a proficiency does, when that's not actually what happens. You never see it being like, oh, you added this to your roll. You roll a dice, it is a number, and then you either do or don't beat the target for that roll. I think it would benefit everyone if they gave that some sort of clarification as far as these tooltips goes. And the second thing is I hope they try to do something to make this a little better to new players. So what I mean by that is people who haven't played D&D might not know as much about what's going on. Factually, if you are more familiar with Dungeons & Dragons character creation, this is going to make 10 times more sense to you, and you're going to actually understand what you're reading. But if you're someone who's never played this type of game before, like Dungeons & Dragons specifically even, telling me, for instance, that I have a medium armor proficiency, which means I don't get disadvantage on my attacks or something if I'm wearing it, that's one thing to me who actually has played Dungeons & Dragons and understands that. But, again, to a new player, that might not necessarily make that much sense. They might not even know what disadvantage means. So little things like that, I think they need to brush these tooltips up and kind of basically help new players to like the entire world of D&D kind of find their way through just a little easier. Now you can see where they have done quite a bit of that. Like for instance, it doesn't give you a ton of superfluous information. They do try to keep it pretty straightforward. But my point is to a new person, they're hitting you with a lot of text. And it's not a great feeling to be like, yeah, you should probably go read the 5th edition player's handbook before you play this game. That way you actually have a better understanding of what you're actually doing and trying to make, and basically how to make someone who's actually good at that particular thing that you want. So just kind of some thoughts there on character creation. By all means, let me know down below what you guys think of it in its current form. What specifically would you like to see added? By the way, Larian has beforehand mentioned that they will likely be adding pretty much everything from the 5th edition player's handbook as far as races and classes go, so you can expect some of that in the future. But in the meantime, I am kind of curious what everyone thinks of the job Larian did taking Dungeons & Dragons character creation and putting it into this game. How do you like it? What are your thoughts? Let me know. In the meantime, may you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.